up, Wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG, and we've got an awesome deck tech for you today. Budget blue-black control, Demir control, whatever you prefer. This is actually one of the better budget decks, I think, that we've done in quite some time. We can make a reasonable facsimile of Esper control just without the white, and it's actually a pretty powerful deck. Let's check it out. 8 creatures in our control deck, which is a lot, but we have a light sort of dragon theme. You know, a lot of these dragons are getting pretty cheap nowadays, and they're still just as good as ever, you know. We're playing 4 copies of Icefall Regent, 2 copies of Silumgar, the Drifting Death, one of my favorite names in Standard, and then 1 copy of Dragonlord Silumgar. Dragonlord Silumgar, a fairly recent addition to the deck, but super awesome. Stealing a creature is really good, especially when you can back it up with counter magic. Basically get pretty much a 2-for-1 out of playing this guy, and that's awesome. Silumgar, the Drifting Death. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and play 2 copies of this just so we can have 7 dragons in the deck. I think that's where we want to be. As far as being able to play dragon, you know, related cards, things we have to have dragons to play. 7 is a good number, so I want to stick around there somewhere. But 2 copies of Drifting Death despite legendary rule because I want to see the guy. I really want to draw this creature an awful lot. Good against a lot of aggro decks in the format, especially tokens, which are gaining prominence nowadays. Tokens is an important deck in like 2 different colors combinations. So yes, definitely his attack step is better than ever right now. And then the playset of Icefall Regent's a really important card in the deck. You know, in the mid-game, we can play this guy and tap down their best creature. It is removal, and it's really good in a format that lacks Lightning Strike. The card got way better when that card rotated. And yeah, we have Fiery Impulse, but they have to fulfill conditions, and it's just not as widely played as Lightning Strike. So just a very good card in this format is Icefall Regent. The one non-dragon creature we're playing is something I definitely think we had to play. I would miss her if we took her out. 1 copy of Halimar Tidecaller. Really want the creature in the deck. We're playing 5 cards with Awaken in the main deck here, and all of them are amazing to get back. You know, this sort of in a budget deck functions a little bit like a Jace. You know, it's Snapcaster-esque in some ways, you know. Presents a threat on its own. I know it's not a big one, but it is a creature that can swing. So, and don't overlook the all your awakened lands can fly. That's awesome. Like, that can win you the game in and of itself. But mostly we're looking to recast bomb spells with Awaken. And the second time around that we cast them, we can often awaken them. Halimar Tidecaller is really good, and like I said, I'd miss her if she was gone. So I want to play at least the 1 copy. 8 counterspells in our control deck. That's a pretty important element. We're playing 3 copies of Silumgar's Scorn. Like I said, we've got 7 dragons in the deck. We might as well play some Silumgar's Scorn. We can make the 2 blue mana fairly reliably by the second turn, you know. We've also got Clash of Wills in the deck to help us out in the early game, just like this card does, you know. This card's really good early. Basically says counter target spell even if you don't have the dragon, as long as you have the 2 blue. And later on in the game, it's just usually going to be a hard counter. So, yes, to just probably the best counter spell we can play in this deck. 2 copies of Clash of Wills to help us out in the early game especially. You know, in the first 2-3 turns, this is just functionally hard removal for just 2 mana. So we really need help in the early game too against some decks. So I love the heck out of this card, by the way. You know, I wanted to play 4 to begin with. I think that that's totally viable in this format, but when we can play Silumgar's Scorn, it sort of diminishes the importance of a card like this, and they're functionally the same in the first couple of turns if you don't have a dragon, you know. So we don't have to play too many copies, but I still think it's important, and it's fine to draw in the late game. We're playing an awful lot of lands, we'll get our drops, it'll be fine. So even on the 5th or 6th turn, we can just cast this for 3 or 4 mana. It will be a hard counter. 2 copies of Scatter to the Winds in this deck. The only true hard counter in the entire deck. The only one that functions as a hard counter every single time that you play it. Really good to get it back with Halimar Tidecaller. That can be really awesome. And when you awaken this, it's great too. You know, like I said, we have 5 things with Awaken in the deck, and that can be really important when it comes to winning the game. We don't have a lot of threats in the deck, but you know that's true of most control decks. So we're not worried too much about it. But Scatter to the Winds, just as a hard counter, you know, most decks in the last 5, 6, 7 years of Standard are going to play a 3 mana hard counter, and this is what we have in this format. And 1 copy of Disdainful Stroke to round out the counterspells, although you could play Horribly Awry if you're so inclined. I've found Disdainful Stroke to be slightly more important in a format with Gideon and Siege Rhino and a bunch of stuff above the curve on that too. So, you know, Obnixilis, Sarkin are both cards. You know, there's a lot of stuff, Ulamog even. So, definitely Disdainful Stroke can be good against a lot of the things that are going to be serious threats to you. And so I like it a little bit better than Horribly Awry. But Horribly Awry can counter, you know, a lot of important things too. Obviously, Manus Rider and Anafinza are the 2 big things that come to mind. And Morph creatures can counter those. So that's awesome too. It all depends sort of on personal preference here. I went with Disdainful Stroke. 12 pieces of removal or functional removal in the deck. Most of these just straight up creature removal. But we'll start with 2 copies of Despise, which is more disruption than removal, yes, but it is removal. You're going to get rid of an important threat for them in the very early turns. Now, we do have 5 swamps. That's the only way of casting this on the first turn, but we can very reliably cast it on the second turn, which is still important. We can take out all the guys I was just talking about, you know, Gideon, Siege Rhino, Anafenza, Manus Rider. If we're on the play, we can take out Jace, you know, Den Protector and stuff like that. We can take out Den Protector a lot of times. So there's really a lot that we can do in this format with a Despise, even if it's just on, even if it's on the second turn. Despise is really, really good. So in the early game, again, we need a lot of help with that. Definitely want to play Despise. Speaking of the early game, 2 copies of Reave Soul in the deck. A card that I've been picking for a while. I like this card a lot, and it occasionally will show up in certain builds, but not very often. You know, most builds will play Esper, and so they don't really need Reave Soul. We play Silk Wrap instead. But in some ways, this is a very similar card to Silk Wrap. I know it doesn't exile the creature, and you know, Silk Wrap is converted mana cost. This is power, so they're a little different. This won't hit, you know, Anafenza the way Silk Wrap will, but still very, very, very good card in the early game, and can take out a lot of important creatures. Jace, Soulfire Grandmaster come to mind right off the bat, you know, and a lot of aggressive creatures too. So still have like Reave Soul. We're not doing too much with our second turn unless we feel like countering spells. So there is a little bit of a push-pull there, but as far as early game removal goes, this is fantastic, to be honest with you. It kills a lot of the things that we're very concerned about in the early game. 3 copies of Ruinous Path in the deck, one of the most important pieces of removal that the deck can possibly play. And I feel like the deck kind of wants 4 Ruinous Path, but I don't know what to take out. Maybe 1 Reave Soul, we don't need it all the time. But again, I don't want to top deck Reave Soul like way late in the game either. So I'm thinking about taking Reave Soul out, but it helps us so much in the early game that I think that might be foolish. But in any case, 3 copies of Ruinous Path, again, I'd like to play 4. But again, Awaken, very, very important on this card. And again, you get this back with Halimar Tidecaller, that can swing the game awesomely, you know. Again, just the most important piece of removal we can play, takes out everything we care about. So, as many Ruinous Paths as we can get away with. 1 copy of Foul-Tongue Invocation in the deck, which helps out tremendously against aggro decks, and can even be good against, you know, opposing Silumgars and Jutais even, you know. So there is that too. It's like Crackling Doom in that way, you know. But gaining the 4 life is really what we're interested in against a lot of aggressive decks, obviously, and even some mid-range decks that play fast, like Abzan, you know. So really important card, but I don't want to play, you know, a bunch of copies of it. I think 1 is probably fine, and there is 1 in the sideboard just in case we run up against very aggressive decks. That 4 life can be really good. And 2 copies to finish off the removal of Crux of Fate in the deck. There was 1 Languish and 1 Crux of Fate, but I decided that I didn't want to risk killing my own Icefall Regents, and possibly killing an Icefall Regent and getting to untap a creature that survives a Languish. Like Siege Rhino is an important example of that. So that synergy didn't feel right at all. Sometimes Languish was dead in my hand, so 2 Crux of Fate is a little bit better, I think. Usually we can survive that extra turn and be able to play our Crux of Fate. And we're running Dragons, so obviously it helps us to play a Crux of Fate over Languish in a lot of situations. So I really, really liked it so far. We need mass removal. That's sort of one of the hallmarks of any, you know, control deck. So we need it. Here it is. We're playing 6 spells that draw us cards. We're playing 3 copies of Treasure Cruise, 2 copies of Anticipate, and 1 copy of Dragonlord's Prerogative, because of course, again, we're playing dragons. This will help out sometimes in a mirror match type situation, but really the draw there is drawing 4 freaking cards. That is a ton of cards. So 4 cards is awesome, as a general rule. Anticipate is great because it lets us, you know, counter spells or cast removal things, and still have the mana to dig if we need to, you know. This will also allow us to dig for a counter spell in some situations, and still have the mana to cast that counter spell, so that's important too. I like Anticipate. And then the 3 copies of Treasure Cruise, which again, I'd like to play 4 copies, but I really don't want to take out and Anticipate. I like the card a lot. So, but Treasure Cruise is functionally a replacement for Dig Through Time in this deck, you know. And we're playing Sphinx's Tutelage in the sideboard in the against the control mirror. So Treasure Cruise is also important for that. It draws the cards, you know. Dig Through Time doesn't help with Sphinx's Tutelage at all. So, but Treasure Cruise has proven to be probably the best of this bunch. I mean, drawing 3 cards for 1 mana is insane. 26 lands in the deck, look at it. We can get away with playing some colorless lands in this deck because we're only running the 2 colors, and we're running a lot of lands. So things like Cataract and, you know, Blighted Fin, Blighted Fin is really good, by the way. I like that card a lot. Cataract is also fantastic. Drawing 2 is great, especially late game, you don't need a land. We could, if you wanted to up the budget a little bit, play, obviously, you know, Polluted Delta and Sunken Hollow. Those are the cards the deck wants an awful lot. But Dismal Backwater is pretty good, you know. Honestly, this is a lot of times our first turn play, our turn 1 play. It enables us to usually get into a Silumgar's Scorn or a Despise on turn 2. That's important. And gains us some life against aggressive decks. I really like Dismal Backwater is all I'm saying. And Foundry of the Consoles is sort of another way of winning the game or having creatures to block. So that's been a really good card too. Here's our sideboard. It's pretty freaking important. Because again, we're a control deck. Sideboard, we really care about all 75 cards in the deck in a control deck. Dispel, really good against, especially opposing control decks, but also against pretty much anything because a lot of decks play huge instants like Dramoka's Command and Natarka's Command, for that matter. And, Jeskai Charm, there's a lot of stuff, that's all I'm saying. Transgress the Mind, important again against a lot of control and mid-range decks, for that matter. Fathom Feeder, good against aggressive decks. We need a lot of help against aggressive decks, by the way. Self-Inflicted Wound, also good against that. Horribly Awry, I've put in the sideboard. You'd see that. If you wanted to play Horribly Awry in the main, just put Disdainful Stroke on the side. Ultimate Price, important against a lot of, like the Atarka aggro deck and the red-green landfall deck. Negate, again, good against a lot of control-based decks. And, again, a lot of aggressive and mid-range decks will still play, like Abzan Charm, Dramoka's Command, Atarka's Command. So there's a lot of important things we can counter with a Negate. And it could make the main deck. Since Tutelage and the Control Mirror, if you can resolve it, is really, really good. Foul-Tongue Invocation against aggressive decks, and then Silumgar's Command is just good all around, and I want it to make the main deck. I just think, again, very, very tight deck list. Here are your power rankings, a final score of 62, and it just barely makes that power score of 7. We are playing a ton of powerful cards, but if I could give it like a 6.5, I'd probably do that, but we are playing a ton of powerful cards. Not very fast at all. There is some synergy in the deck for a control deck. That's fairly unusual, but we do have Dragon synergy. That's important. Halimar Tidecaller is synergy, and, even Evolving Wilds is in the deck. That's synergy with our Delve cards, so there is some synergy. Versatility, again, we're very versatile, and resiliency too. We can just turn the game around with a huge, big creature, some removal, draw spell to help us refill our hand. We've got a lot of ways, and mass removal. We got a lot of ways of being resilient in the deck, and versatility, again, lots of removal. Offense, again, we're really not very offensive, and Icefall Regent's obviously the best offensive creature in the deck, but we could use a little more help, but I could see maybe playing like an Obnixilis. That would be another way of winning the game, and it would be good because, we can kill dudes with it and draw cards, something that we really want in this deck. So I could see playing 1 or 2 Obnixilis. Defense is very high. Game 1 is good and board is good. I think that those numbers are true, although, again, if I could give these, 6.5s, I'd probably do that. But we're just as good after boards. We have a lot of tools in the board. And then consistency, very consistent, because we're just a 2-color deck, we can make those colors very, very easily. Even though there are a lot of 1 and 2-ofs in the deck, which would normally decrease consistency, but again, this is a control deck, so you don't really look at the individual, how many copies of each card there are as far as consistency goes. You just look at like each mana slot, Reave Soul is our 2-mana creature removal thing, Ruinous Path, our 3-mana creature removal thing. Is sort of how it works in a control deck. So you don't really look at the 1 and 2-ofs as, hurting our consistency. They're just sort of in different slots depending on, according to our need. Well, in its current state, the deck will cost anywhere between $20 and $30 on TCG Player to make. Low price is $20, median price is about $30. So either way you slice it, that's a pretty cheap, very competitive constructed deck. A final score of 62 is really, really good for a budget deck. Very, very respectable. And the deck is easily upgradable if you wanted to spend some money on it, You could probably play another Ruinous Path, I've said that, but it only cost you another $1.50. You could remove Cruise or Anticipate and play Dig Through Time, about $4 or $5 a piece on those. You could play Polluted Delta and Sunken Hollow, I've mentioned that. That would increase the land base's consistency a little bit. You could play Obnixilis, I've mentioned that. I think that's a very important card for the deck, by the way, if you wanted to not play white. And even if you played white, I can see playing 1 Ob. And you could play a full playset of He Who Shall Not Be Named. Well, that's all I've got for now. Let me know how you feel about this one. It's really a good jumping off point for Standard in this format, especially if you're looking to build into a really good Standard deck. I think this is probably where you want to start if you're looking to break into Esper, Well, what are we doing next time? Definitely want to do this mono-red mid-rangey thing that I've been brewing up. Really excited about that deck. And healer combos coming very soon after that, so stay tuned. I'm Dev from SBMTG. If you enjoyed the content, you know what to do. Just hit the thumbs up button, helps us out tremendously. Let us know how you felt about it, and then sub if you're new, or if you haven't done that yet. I think it's important to me. Please do that. And yeah, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching, my wizards.